Welcome, weary soul, to Nocturne Lore. Breathe with me now. Let the weight of the day fall from your shoulders. You are safe here in the quiet between heartbeats. Tonight we drift together into the deep past. I often wonder where in this broken galaxy you listen from. The spires of Terra, the hives of Necromunda, or worlds far beyond. If you wish, leave a word in the comments below. Fey your city, your world, your corner of the night. I will read them all, and know you are not alone in the darkness. Close your eyes now. The story begins. I have whispered this tale only 1,000 years, always at bedsides like this, where breath grows shallow, and the long night presses close. You have been told the Salamanders are kind, that they are gentle giants in a cruel galaxy, and that belief has helped many sleep. But warmth can scorch more deeply than cold. There is a truth sealed beneath obsidian vaults and forgotten names, a truth Vulkan himself carried like a slow, burning coal within his chest. That mercy does not spare you from loss. It only ensures you feel every fragment of it. Listen with fear, but with trust, because what I will share is not meant to wake you. It is meant to hold you, like embers cupped in patient hands. I remember Nocturne before the galaxy learned to fear its fire. The skies were dark, yes, but they were not hostile. They glowed with slow color of dying suns, and ash fell gently like snow that never stung. The ground breathed warmth through stone, a living planet, never silent. Volcanoes did not rage, they slept, and when they stirred, it was with the sound choice. But by understanding on Nocturne, isolation was death, and closeness was survival. Thinkleys gathered around hearth, fires carved directly into black rock. Children learned the language of flame before they learned fear, and every scar was a lesson shared, never hid destruction. It was memory, it was inheritance, it was family. Then Vulkan walked among them. I was there the first time I saw him kneel, not to a king, not to a shrine, but to an injured worker whose forge had collapsed. His massive hands trembled as he lifted broken stone from care. He spoke softly, always softly, as though the world itself might bruise if addressed too harshly. In Vulkan's presence, even the flames leaned inward, as if listening. He did not teach the people to endure. Fire, he taught fire, themselves seemed to hold their breath. Vulkan did not rejoice. He asked questions, quiet ones, heavy ones. What happens to the weak when the strong march on? Who protects those too slow to flee? When war demands speed, I heard these questions, and at brothers, the Salamanders were forged in that image, not merely as warriors, but as shields. When they first donned their green ceramite, it was darker than other legions' armor, as though already stained by ash, as though prepared to carry what others would not, and learn to wait. Waiting is a form of pain few warriors tolerate, but the Salamanders did during the Great Crusade. I followed them world to world. My parchment yellowed, my hands never aged. My heart grew heavier with every victory. Where other legions struck and departed, remained. They stayed while fires cooled, while survivors were counted, while the wounded were carried. I saw Astartes stand motionless for days, guarding refugee lines, their armor pitted and blackened, their weapons silent. They did not measure success in conquered systems. Still whispered at night, this devotion was admired and quietly resented because it slowed campaigns, because it cost resources, because it cost lives. The galaxy is impatient, and it punishes those who linger. There was a world, I will not name it, where evacuation should have ended. Salamanders refused to withdraw. One final shelter remained, deep beneath a manufactorum. Children, elders, those who could not run. The enemy closed in, not screaming, not raging, just advancing. The salamanders formed a wall. They did not shout. Transport lifted. Only half of them remained standing. The rest became names etched into cooling metal. That night, I saw Space Marines weep. Not loudly. Never loudly. Tears vanished instantly against heated armor, turning to steam, leaving only salt. And slowly now, let the warmth settle behind your ribs, like a forge banked low. You are safe here. The embers are steady. I remain with you now, as the embers glow a little dimmer, and the warmth grows heavier to carry. Breathe with me, slowly, as memory deep. Salamanders were changed, not in armor, not in doctrine, but in the quiet spaces between words. They still refuse to abandon the weak, but each choice settled deeper into their bones, like ash that cannot be brushed away. I noticed it first in their silences. Longer pauses, looks toward evacuation columns already gone, helmets tilted as though listening for voices that would never answer. Vulkan saw it too, though he never spoke of it aloud. On Nocturne, fire teaches patience, but the galaxy teaches haste, and the tension between those lessons began to pull. Suns, worlds fell faster now. Compliance demanded speed, and there was less time to remain behind. Still, the salamanders lingered. They repaired habs instead of raising them, guided civilians through smoke, choked corridors, stood as living bulwarks while others pressed forward, watched, and did not always approve. I heard the murmurs in command halls, spoken softly enough to seem respectful, sharp enough to wound all the same. They said the salamanders were inefficient, sentimental, burdened by mortal weakness. They did not understand that Vulkan, older than war, that survival without memory is hollow. The embers endure. I remember a rain-soaked world of steel plains where water fell endlessly on adamantium towers, each droplet ringing like a distant bell. The salamanders moved through that rain slowly, green armor darkened almost, steam rising gently where heat met water. Civilians followed in their wake, not running, not screaming, simply walking. Trust is a fragile thing, yet there it was, forged quietly in moments like these. A child reached out once, touching the gauntlet of a salamander. The Astartes froze, so the child would not have to reach so high. I wrote that moment down, my hand trembling despite centuries of practice. Such gestures were never recorded in official annals, but they mattered more than victories. They always do. Yet for every soul saved, another brother fell behind, sometimes to wounds, sometimes to exhaustion, sometimes simply to the refusal to abandon one last corridor, one last shelter, one last heartbeat. The Salamanders learned to grieve without ceremony. No banners, no grand speeches, just quiet circles of green helmets bowed as embers dimmed. Fire remembers, even when history does not. Vulkan bore this weight in silence. He used to stand alone at the edge of encampments, watching fires burn down to coals, his massive frame unmoving, as if daring the night to approach. I never ordered retreat sooner. He looked at me for a long time, eyes reflecting the fire, and he said, very softly, if I teach them to leave, who will teach them to stay? That answer haunted me, as it haunted his legion. Fractured. I will not whisper names tonight. They are too heavy, and you are meant to rest. But betrayal does not always arrive screaming. Sometimes it comes as silence on the Vox, as orders that never arrive, as allies who do not come when called. The Salamanders felt this before Mo. Used to being last. Used to being behind the lines. Used to holding ground no one else wanted. When disaster struck, they were already there, already standing between civilians and annihilation, already committed, already unable to withdraw. On ISTV, ash storms and shattered ground, the Salamanders sought survivors. I saw them carry broken bodies, not their own, heard them call out into smoke, not for brothers, but for any voice that answered. Vulkan vanished into flame and shadow, and his sons were left with faith alone. As they endured, the embers endure. After Ice-T-Van, the Legion was shattered, not destroyed, but scattered, like coals kicked from a dying fire. Those who survived gathered survivors again, always again. They protected refugee fleets, escorted pilgrim convoys, their names. They became legends among the powerless, and footnotes among the powerful. This did not trouble them. What troubled them was the quiet question none dared speak. How long can you burn before even fire grows cold? I saw it in their movements, slow against memory. I heard it in their prayers, murmured not for victory, but for strength to endure one more dawn. They reforged their armor themselves, hammering dents, smooth, etching names into inner plates, where only they would see. Each spoke of Vulkan. It was not as a lost Primarch. It was as a promise that fire could be reborn. Breathe with me now. Feel the warmth settle deeper, steady, unflickering. You are drifting, and the embers hold. I am still here, me now. As the age turns, and endurance becomes habit, after the fires of betrayal cooled, after names were carved into memory instead of stone, the Salamanders did not seek vengeance. They sought purpose. The Imperium that rose from the ashes was colder than the one that fell, more distant, hurried. It spoke of necessity, of sacrifice measured in numbers too large to feel. The Salamanders listened and said little, already learned what sacrifice truly weighed. In those early centuries of the Imperium's long dusk, their numbers were few, their forges quiet, precious. Every loss was permanent, every brother irreplaceable, and still, they stood where others would not, on border worlds, on forgotten moons, on places where distress signals faded before anyone else answered. I followed them still, watched them arrive without fanfare, without banners, without expectation of recognition. They came as heat against the cold. Civilians learned to recognize them, not by heraldry, but by behavior. They waited. They listened. They stayed. A salamander would lower his weapon to help stand watch through. Entire nights of acid rain would offer solace instead of orders. Such things unsettled Imperial commanders. Mercy is difficult to catalog. I remember a mining world on the edge of collapse, its population starving, its tithe long overdue. Compliance or punishment. The Salamanders delivered neither. They repaired generators, reinforced tunnels, escorted food shipments through pirate infested void. When asked why, they answered simply, because they are still alive. That answer was recorded by hardening itself. The Salamanders endured by refusing. To this made them rare, and therefore lonely. They trained recruits differently, not only in warcraft, but in restraint. Trials on Nocturne were brutal, yet never meaningless. Each ordeal, survivors were not praised for strength alone, but for compassion retained under pressure. Those who passed Lenten of all, that power exists to be held back, not asking for return, but for guidance. In the glow of molten metal, they whispered his name like a mantra. I stood among them once, listening. Their voices were deep, measured, heavy with centuries. They did not beg. They endured. Aftermaths, they arrived after battles ended, to tend to what remained. Bodies, ruins, survivors, too stunned to speak. They became witnesses, and witnesses change. I saw brothers grow slower, not from age, but from consideration. We save. How many did we leave? Questions without answers. Other chapters found their glory in conquest. The Salamanders found theirs in quiet moments. No one applauded. A mother reunited with her child. A settlement rebuilt instead of abandoned. A knight survived victories. And still, the galaxy punished them for it. They were deployed late, reinforcements delayed, requests unanswered. In times of crisis, they were sent where hope was already thin, because they would not abandon it. I remember a world unreliable, supply lines broken. The Salamanders arrived anyway. They established shelters, rationed their own provisions, shared heat with the unarmored. When extraction finally came, they were the last aboard. 2 brothers remained planetside. No statues were raised, no honors bestowed, only names added, quietly to inner armor plates. The embers endure. In the long centuries that followed, their rituals grew quieter. No grand feasts, no roaring celebrations, just time spent together, around remembered. They spoke of Nocturne often, even when far from it, as if the planet itself listened. They carried its fire within them, banked, controlled, never unleashed without cause. I watched a salamander refuse an order once. Politely, firmly, enemy advance. The salamander said, "We will hold them here instead." And they did, at terrible cost. The city survived. The chapter diminished. Such exchanges happened often. The galaxy did not notice the difference, but the survivors did. They remembered green armor in the smoke, the dark hands that pulled them free. That memory passed through generations, long after the salamanders themselves had moved on or fallen. I grew tired then, more tired than immortality should allow, because watching hope survive is more exhausting than watching it. Attention, choice. The salamanders chose again and again, and every choice left a mark. Feel your breath now, slow. Even the night is quiet. The embers low, you are drifting, and I remain. I am still with you. Return, like a familiar weight across the chest. In time, all paths lead back to Nocturne, even when the salamanders were scattered across the Imperium. Even when centuries passed between homecomings, their thoughts bent inward, toward fire, toward restraint. Nocturne did not welcome them gently. It never had. The skies still glowed with ember, light. The ground still shifted beneath patient feet. Volcanoes still breathed like sleeping giants. But there was comfort in its hostility, because none existed, and it did not punish endurance without reason. When salamanders returned from long campaigns, they did not rest immediately. They walked the ash plains first, alone, helmets removed, breathing sulfur and heat into scarred lungs. Remembrance. Each step across burning stone recalled another step taken elsewhere, through ruined cities, through smoke, filled corridors, through worlds that no longer existed. Fire remembers. In the forge halls, the chapter gathered quietly. No banner space instead. There were tools, hammers worn smooth by centuries of use, anvils cracked but unbroken, braziers burning low and steady. Each salamander worked his own armor. No artificer did this labor for them. They reforged their ceramite by hand. New marks into hidden places, names, dates, coordinates, worlds remembered not for conquest, but for survival. I watched one warrior pause for a long time, his gauntlet resting against cooling metal. When he spoke, it was barely a whisper. He had carried from rubble decades earlier. He did not know if she had survived long after, but he remembered. That was enough. Vulkan's teachings lived here, not in scripture, but in habit. The salamanders did not preach compassion. They practiced it. Even among themselves, when a brother fell, there was no public mourning. Grief was private, shared only in small circles, around dim forges, where voices could remain low. They spoke of the fallen not as heroes, but as hands once held, voices once heard, presences now absent. Such remembrance kept pride from taking root. Harsher with time, more rigid, more desperate, doctrines hardened into absolutes, and mercy was increasingly labeled inefficiency. The Salamanders adapted, but never surrendered the war. They learned to speak carefully, to justify actions in length field. They remained unchanged. They still placed themselves between danger and the defenseless, still waited until the last possible moment, still absorbed losses others would not. I saw them turn away from easy victories. If those victories required abandonment, such choices isolated them. Other chapters respected their strength, but did not emulate their restraint, because restraint demands sacrifice without reward. In time, the Salamanders became quiet legends, not sung, but remembered. In refugee camps, in half rebuilt cities, in stories shout, who did not hurry, who did not leave. This reputation followed them and weighed upon them. For every call for aid they answered, 3 more followed. They could not be everywhere, and that knowledge, that limitation, hurt them deeply. I once saw a salamander kneel, listening to a distress signal fade. Static swallowed the voice, and silence followed. He remained kneeling long after, as though still listening. Fire remembers. In the centuries after Vulkan's disappearance, hope became something quieter. No longer expectation, but possibility. Not wait for their Primarch's return. They lived as though he still watched. Each act of protection, each refusal to abandon, became a message sent into the dark. We are still here. Nocturne itself seemed to respond. Volcanic cycles steadied. Ford, the Salamanders did not. They believed the planet listened. As they listened to the Imperium's pain, recruitment grew harder. Fewer survived the trials. Fewer still embodied the balance Vulkan demanded. Strength without cruelty, fury without hatred. Those who failed were not mourned, because failure meant misunderstanding, and misunderstanding meant potential harm. Only those who could carry warmth into darkness were chosen. I watched initiates struggle, not with fire, but with choice. One trial demanded they save only one of 2 groups. Some chose wrongly. Those who chose to protect the most vulnerable, even at personal cost, were marked, not praised, just noted. This was the Salamander's way. Quiet acknowledgement, deep expectation. As centuries passed, the chapter names more reasons to endure. Their armor grew heavier, not physically, but emotionally, and still, they marched. Still, they guarded. Still, they remained. Breathe slowly now. Let the fire settle low. You are safe in this. I remain with you. The night holds steady, and the embers have not gone out. Breathe gently now, as time turns its slow, grinding wheel, and we step closer to the age you know. The present era of the Imperium is not young. It is tired. Its structures endure by habit rather than hope. Its wars fought because stopping feels impossible. The salamanders endure within this age like coals buried deep beneath ash, still warm, still alive. Their numbers are few now, fewer than ever before. Every gene seed tithe is counted twice, every loss recorded with care that borders on grief. Everywhere, they are most needed. Border worlds, aflame, hives collapsing under their own weight, systems forgotten by strategic charts. The salamanders go where the cries are weakest, because those voices fade first. I have walked among them in this age, older than the Imperium itself, small beside their patience. Their armor bears the marks of countless campaigns, patched, reforged, never replaced lightly. Each suit is a history. They speak little during transit, preferring the quiet hum of engines, the distant rain of debris. Them, it is space to remember. When they make planetfall, it is never dramatic. No thunderous announcements, no grand formations, just the steady descent, the hiss of cooling metal, the scent of ash. Civilians often do not realize what they are seeing at first. Voices low and calm, gestures measured. Fear gives way to confusion, confusion to trust. This pattern repeats world after world. Trust is built slowly and repaid quickly. I saw them on a shrine world once, where fanaticism had turned brother against brother. They did not burn temples. They escorted the unarmed away from violence, stood between mobs and sanctuaries, absorbed blows meant for others. Their armor cracked, their ranks thinned, but the streets grew quiet. Such actions earn no medals, only whispers. The chapter master carries this burden. Visibly now, his voice is steady, but his eyes are older than his ears. He knows what every deployment costs, and still he authorizes them, because refusing would cost more. This knowledge is shared among all ranks. A Salam war doctrine has adapted. They favor holding actions, evacuation corridors, defensive perimeters around civilian concentrations. They wield flame not as terror, but as barrier. Fire lines drawn carefully, funnels of heat to deny passage. Fear, but confusion. They expect fury and meet resolve instead. The salamanders are patient. Patience unsettles those who thrive on chaos. Still, the galaxy presses harder each century. Threats multiply, wars overlap, and even endurance has limits. They speak of strain, not fear. Never fear, but sorrow. Sorrow that they cannot answer every call, that for each world saved, another burns unseen. This knowledge weighs upon them more heavily than casualties. They are haunted not by what they have done, but by what they could not reach in time. Once heard a salamander whisper during warp transit, "If we were more." He did not finish the thought. He did not need to. Fire remembers. The return of Vulkan remains unconfirmed. Rumor, hope, heresy, depending on who speaks. Relics. Keep forges ready. Train as though tomorrow might bring revelation. Hope, to them, is not waiting. It is readiness. When they speak Vulkan's name now, it is softer than ever. Not longing, but reassurance. as if reminding themselves that kindness will again. The Imperium often misunderstands them. Some commanders accuse them of inefficiency, others of insubordination masked as virtue. The Salamanders accept this without protest. They have learned that explanation rarely changes minds, action does. I saw an Inquisitor watch a Salamander hold a collapsing bridge alone, flame washing harmlessly around green armor. As civilians crossed behind him, the Inquisitor said nothing afterward. Some truths cannot be argued against. Even so, the cost accumulates. Brothers lost faster than they can be replaced. Veterans care younger warriors burdened too early with responsibility. They age, not in years, but in weight. Still, they gather at forges when they can. They speak of home, of nocturne skies, of heat that does not threaten. They share in their hearts. Those people are family. This is their greatest divergence from other chapters. They do not draw lines between human and Astartes. They draw circles of protection that include all within reach. The galaxy punishes such thinking, but the Salamanders persist. Them stand against horrors that should not exist, not with rage, but with grim tenderness, as if even monsters deserve to be ended cleanly. When the battle ends, they do not celebrate, they search for survivors, for bodies to recover, for ruins that might still shelter life. Nothing left to do. Do they allow themselves rest? And even then, sleep comes lightly. They dream of fire, not as weapon, but as hearth. Breathe slowly. Now, let that warmth reach your hands, your chest. You are drifting. And the embers, it has only grown softer. Breathe with me now. Slowly, as we move into the quiet places, the Salamanders rarely share. There is a grief they carry that cannot be spoken aloud. Not because it is forbidden, but because words would make it heavier. This grief does not scream, pauses before orders. In the way, a salamander watches evacuation ramps until the last light fades. In the careful handling of civilian remains, as though gentleness might still matter. I learned long ago that Space Marines do not forget. They endure memory different. Not an echo, it is a companion. They do not attempt to silence it. They make room. I have stood with them after battles where nothing remained standing, where the air smelled of smoke and old rain, where ash drifted like slow snow. Answer, when none came, they bowed their heads, not in defeat, but acknowledgement. This grief is disciplined. It is never allowed to become bitterness, never sharpened into hatred, because hatred burns too fast. Vulkan taught them that fire that consumes itself. They bank their sorrow like coals, deep, slow. This is why the Salamanders are so deliberate. Every step, every strike, every choice, all measured against the weight they already carry. I once asked a veteran why they did not release this grief, why they did not let it turn to fury. For a long time, then answered quietly, if I let it go, who remembers them? Fire remembers. Among themselves, the Salamanders allow small rituals, not formal, not mandated shared silence at the end of campaigns, hands resting on heated armor, breath synchronizing a proximity matters to them. Distance feels like abandonment. In these moments, no ranks are observed. A newly forged brother stands beside ancients whose armor bears centuries of marks. Memory is shared without words. Sometimes a name is spoken, sometimes only a breath. Remove a small charm from within his armor. A child's crude carving, blackened but intact. He did not explain it. He did not need to. The Salamanders do not grieve only their own. That is the burden that truly sets them apart. They mourn civilians, entire populations. They survive only as coordinates. Most warriors learn to compartmentalize such loss. The Salamanders refuse to. They believe forgetting is a second death. This belief isolates them. Other chapters admire their strength, but rarely understand their sorrow. Big values speed. I have watched Salamanders arrive too late, not because they were slow, but because the galaxy was vast. They did not rage. They stood amid ruins, hands clenched, breathing steadily. Then they gathered remains, marked sites, and carried endurance. Not by denial, but by responsibility. The Salamanders teach this quietly to their neophytes, not through lectures, but example. A recruit learns when to lower his weapon, when to wait, when to stand in the open instead of seeking cover. Salamanders accept this, but never lightly. Each loss is accounted for, not in tallies, but in silence, long respectful. They do not tell themselves comforting lies. They do not claim that sacrifice is always necessary. They simply accept that they chose this path, and choosing it meaningfully. Fire remembers. There are moments when the grief threatens to overwhelm even them, when wars overlap, when distress calls stack endlessly, when commanders demand impossible prioritization. In these moments, the Salamanders retreat inward, not forges, even improvised ones, a brazier, a damaged reactor, anything that emits steady heat. They work, repairing armor, reshaping blades, cleaning weapons already clean. The work is not necessary. The rhythm is hammer. I've never seen a salamander drink to forget. They do not seek numbness. They seek clarity, because clarity allows them to choose again tomorrow. There is a misconception that kindness weakens them. Those who believe this have never stood beside them when the line breaks, when civilians are behind them, and retreat is impossible. In those moments, the Salamanders do not fight harder. They fight steadier. Their movement slow, economical, unwavering. Because panic has no place in protection. Their grief sharpens focus. It does not dull it, but from incomprehension. How do you move forward without rage, without hatred, without frenzy? The Salamanders answer with presence. They are there, unmoving, unyielding, until the threat passes. Then they kneel, and the grief returns. In this age of endless war, the Salamanders remain bound to one another by this quiet sorrow. It is their inheritance, As much as fire, as much as strength, perhaps more. I have lived long enough to know that civilizations fall not from cruelty, but from forgetting. Salamanders remember. That is why they endure. That is why they suffer. That is why they remain. Breathe gently now. Feel the warmth steady your heart. You are not alone in the darkness, and neither are they. I am still here, and the night traces the salamanders leave behind, the ones that do not fade when armor departs. There are no monuments raised in their honor, no grand processions etched into imperial memory. Instead, there are stories, quiet ones, passed hand to hand, voice to voice, generation to generation. I followed these stories longer than any campaign. They surface in refugee camps, in rebuilt hubs, in children's games played among ruins. Green giants who stood in the smoke, who did not shout, who did not hurry, who did not leave. These legends are never consistent. The details change. Forgotten, but the feeling remains. Warmth in the middle of terror. A calm voice telling you where to go. A massive hand lifting debris without complaint. A presence that made panic hesitate. This is how the salamanders become immortal. Not through records, world long after the salamanders departed. Years later, a child pointed at a scarred section of stone. He said, "That's where the green one stood." He did not know the warrior's name. He did not need to. The stone itself seemed to remember. Fire remembers. The salamanders rip stories. They do not linger to hear thanks. They leave when the danger passes, when rebuilding begins, when their presence is no longer required. Protection, not attachment. Yet, attachment forms anyway. It always does. Some civilians attempt to follow the warmth. The salamanders gently refuse. This path is not meant for those who still have a life to live. They understand that better than most. I have heard salamanders spoken of in hushed tones on worlds they never return to. Parents warning children, if you misbehave, the green giants come. Then smiling, no, they only come when things are truly wrong. This distinction matters. Fear fades. Respect endures. There are places where imperial faith blends with these memories. Shrines erected not to saints, but to protection itself. Simple stone figures. Cloth. The ecclesiarchy does not approve, but it tolerates them, because pilgrims leave offerings, and offerings mean stability. I once watched an elderly woman place a candle at such a shrine. She whispered a name. Not Vulkan's. But the fire did. Fire remembers. These legends carry a burden of their own. They create expectation when disaster strikes again. People look to the sky. They hope for green armor. Sometimes it comes. Sometimes it does not. Deeply as despair. The salamanders know this. It weighs upon them when they cannot answer every call. They do not speak of it. They simply carry it among themselves. They occasionally exchange fragments. A report intercepted. A rumor confirmed. A world remembers us. Without pride. As reassurance. that their endurance mattered, that someone lived because they stayed. This knowledge sustains them more than commendations ever could in the Imperium's vast archives. Their actions are often reduced to tactical footnotes. Rear, guard engagement, unexpected casualties. The language does not capture intent. It never does. I have tried. My parchments filled with descriptions of hands lifting rubble, of bodies shielding others, of fires shaped carefully. Most of these records were sealed or ignored because combat doctrine. Yet doctrine does not shape the soul of the Imperium. People do, and people remember. I once encountered a regiment that painted a small green mark on their armor. Not official, not sanctioned. When asked why, the commander said, "They stood for us once because of it." Such ripples spread quietly, unnoticed by strategists, unmeasured by tides, but real. The Salamanders influence the galaxy in this way, indirectly, patiently, by example. This is why they are dangerous to despair. Despair thrives on inevitability. Choice to stay, choice to protect, choice to endure. These choices remind others that cruelty is not the only path, that memory alone is subversive. In some sectors, stories of the Salamanders are discouraged. Officials claim they encourage unrealistic expectations. They are not wrong. Expectations shape behavior, and behavior shapes survival. The Salamanders accept this quietly. They do not correct stories, do not clarify myths. If someone believes a green giant will come and holds on a little longer, that is enough. Fire remembers. Salamanders who stood until nothing remained, who vanished into flame rather than retreat. These stories are told with reverence and sorrow, not as cautionary tales, but acknowledgments that sometimes endurance costs everything. The Salamanders, either they simply remember within the chapter. There are names spoken only during certain rituals, brothers who chose to hold impossible lines, not because orders demanded it, but because civilians were still evacuating. These names are never spoken loudly. They are breathed, shared only among those who understand the cost. I have listened, and I have never forgotten, even now, as my voice grows tired, and the long night presses close. These legends continue, not because the Salamanders seek them, but because people need them. In a galaxy that teaches abandonment, an age that rewards haste, they reward patience. In a universe that forgets the weak, they remember. That is why their stories persist, not as songs, but as embers, carried forward. Quietly, breathe now. Let the warmth settle. Has deepened, but it has not grown colder. Breathe slowly now. As we come to the edge of something the Salamanders rarely face openly, exhaustion, not of the body. Their bodies endure far beyond mortal limits, but of the spirit. There comes a point, even for fire. Forged souls becomes a question whispered in the dark. The Salamanders do not speak of this aloud. They do not frame it as doubt or weakness. They call it weight. I began to notice it centuries ago, in the way veterans lingered a moment longer before deployment, in how hands rested on the forge rail, drawing strength from its warmth. They were still resolute, still committed, but the years had accumulated, layer upon layer, like ash settling on embers. The galaxy does not pause to allow rest. Wars overlap, fronts multiply. Distress signals stack, stretched thin. This becomes a quiet siege. I watched salamanders receive orders they knew would cost them dearly. Not because the mission was impossible, but because it was necessary. They accepted without complaint. Yet, afterward, in the not speak of fear. They spoke of limits. How many worlds can we hold? How many can we reach? Questions asked, not to shirk duty, but to understand it. Fire remembers. There are moments when endurance demands rest. The salamanders understand this, in theory. Feels too close to leaving, and leaving has always been their deepest wound. On Nocturne, this tension manifests in ritual. Veterans are encouraged to return home, to walk the ash plains, to spend time at the forges without purpose, just heat. While the galaxy burns elsewhere, others comply reluctantly, and in those moments, the fire does its quiet work. It does not erase memory, it tempers it. I have seen salamanders sit for days, staring into molten metal, not shaping, not hammering themselves to settle. This is not idleness, it is recovery. The kind the Imperium rarely allows. Even so, many salamanders return to duty too soon because calls keep coming, because people still need protection, because endurance has become identity, heard a salamander admit, in a voice barely above a breath. If I stop, who takes my place? There was no answer. Fire remembers. The chapter leadership bears this weight most acutely. They must choose where to send dwindling strength, which cries to answer first, unprotected. This knowledge scars deeper than any blade. They do not sleep easily, not because of nightmares, but because of lists, worlds, requests, coordinates. They recite them silently, even while resting, as if memory alone might preserve them. Steady, mind already racing. Duty does not wait for dawn. Despite this, they do not collapse. They adapt. Endurance evolves. They learn to rotate duties, to pair veterans with younger brothers, to share burden more deliberately. They teach restraint not only save everyone, but you can save someone. This lesson is painful, but it keeps them moving. The Imperium rarely notices these adjustments. From the outside, the salamanders appear unchanged, still steadfast, still reliable. Only those who stand close feel the strain. Chapter serfs, the civilians who work alongside them. They see salamanders pause, hands resting on walls, eyes closed for a moment too long. Then the armor straightens, and duty resumes. Fire remembers. There's a temptation, even for them, to become to prioritize efficiency over presence. Some chapters have walked that path. The salamanders know where it leads. Cold victory and silent aftermaths. They resist, not because it is easy, but because abandoning their creed would make the exhaustion meaningless. Better rested and empty, I have seen them laugh rarely, quietly, usually around forges, or during brief lulls. The laughter is subdued, almost surprised, as if joy itself feels unfamiliar, but it exists, and when it does, it renews them more effectively than rest alone, because endure. There are moments, small ones, a child offering water to an Astartes, a rebuilt home standing intact, a night passed without alarm. These moments matter, they sustain. The salamanders collect them unconsciously, tucking them away like ember. They avoid burning out, not by forgetting sorrow, but by balancing it. Even so, some brothers reach the edge. When they do, the chapter does not shame them. They are reassigned to training, to forge work, to roles that protect indirectly. This is considered honor because teaching restraint vital as practicing it. I once watched a veteran instruct a neophyte, not in weapon drills, but in when to stop swinging. Knowing when not to strike is harder than knowing how. The salamanders understand this deeply. It is their quiet legacy. As the galaxy grows louder, they remain not unbroken, but unburned. Breathe gently now. Feel the warmth steady. You are drifting, and the embers endure. Stay with me. The fire is steady again, but tonight it burns around a hollow. Because now we must speak of Vulkan, not as myth, not as a symbol carved into banners, but as absence. The salamanders rarely say his name aloud without ceremony. Longing, Vulkan did not simply lead them. He shaped how they understood themselves. Strength with mercy, power without cruelty, fire that warms before it destroys. When he vanished, he did not take hope with him. He took certainty. The Imperium remembers Vulkan, who stood again among his sons. The Salamanders remember something more complex. A father who came back and left again. That second departure mattered more, because it taught them a truth they still struggle to articulate. Even legends do not stay forever. Vulkan promised themselves he would. Either way, his absence became a presence. Every forge hall carries it. Every council chamber, every battlefield where restraint must be chosen over rage. When salamanders hesitate before annihilation, they feel his gaze, not accusing, silently. Is this the choice he would make? Not because they require permission, but because Vulkan represented something fragile, moral clarity in a galaxy that erodes it relentlessly. Without him, that clarity must be maintained by effort, and effort exhausts. Some chapters anchor themselves to doctrine, others to strategy, others to fear. The salamanders anchor themselves to memory. Memory is less stable. It shifts, it softens, it fractures under pressure. This terrifies them, because if Vulkan becomes only a story, then his lessons risk becoming not through statues alone, but through practice. Every act of mercy is a rehearsal. Every refusal to abandon civilians is repetition. Every delay to extract the helpless, rather than pursue glory. They reenact Vulkan daily, and that is heavier than worship. Worship asks only belief, discipline. There are brothers who resent this. Quietly, they never voice it as rebellion, only as fatigue. They ask themselves, would Vulkan truly demand this every time, in every war? Or have we bound ourselves too tightly to his shadow? Heretical. But because they tempt simplification, it would be easier to remember Vulkan as perfect figures, excuse imperfection in followers. But Vulkan was not perfect. He doubted. He grieved. He raged. And most importantly, he chose. Again and again. Instruction. This distinction matters. The Salamanders do not follow Vulkan's orders. They follow Vulkan's method. Pause. Consider consequence. Accept pain if it spares the innocent. This method is slow. The galaxy punishes slowness. So Vulkan's absence and survival itself. There are moments when a salamander wonders, if Vulkan stood here now, would he make the same choice I am making? And the fear is not that the answer is no. The fear is that the answer cannot be known, because Vulkan is not here to confirm. That uncertainty. Inheritance. Fire remembers. The artifacts Vulkan left behind deepen this tension. Relics that test, not empower. Trials that break the unworthy, but also break the worthy. Why would a father leave weapons that harm his sons? The Salamanders debate this quietly. Trials as preparation, others believe they were safeguards, and some, rarely, wonder if they were expressions of doubt. Doubt that even his sons could carry his legacy without strain. If so, the trials are not cruel, they are confession. Vulkan knew the burden he was placing upon them, and he did not lessen it. He simply acknowledged it. This is why the Salamanders approach his relics with reverence and fear, not because of their power, but because of what they imply. That Vulkan expected struggle, that he did not believe virtue would endure effortless strengthens them, because it reframes failure. Failure is not betrayal. It is anticipated. What matters is response. Do you harden? Or do you return to the forge? Do you abandon restraint? Or do you relearn it? Vulkan's absence forces growth. They see salamanders as slow, overly compassionate, inefficient. They do not see the discipline required to choose mercy repeatedly. They do not see the arguments fought internally. They do not see the nights spent debating whether a single transport could have saved more lives. Seen, that belief matters, even if he is gone. Salamanders speak sometimes, in private, of Vulkan as if he is simply delayed, something subtle. Hope is not expectation. It is an obligation if he returns. They must be worthy if he never does. They must still live as if he could. This is the hardest form of faith. Faith without confirmation. Fire remembers. I have praying, just standing. Armor still, helm removed, as if listening. They do not ask for guidance. They ask for alignment. Am I still walking the path? That question sustains them, more than certainty ever could. As the galaxy fractures sharpens, because without him, the Salamanders must decide what remains sacred. They choose every day, not perfectly, but deliberately, and that is Vulkan's true legacy. Not a return, but a standard. It breathes, because the future of the Salamanders does not arrive with fanfare. It arrives quietly, carried in the posture of the newly forged. I have watched generations rise from the ashen soil of Nocturne, their skin darkened by sun and flame, their eyes reflecting fires old. One told the same truth before they ever spoke it. They were born into inheritance, not wealth, not glory, but expectation. The next generation does not remember Vulkan, not as presence, not even as an absence. They inherit him as gravity, something felt. Safety rights, alongside the names of ancestors lost to eruption and war. Vulkan becomes context, and context shapes behavior more than command. This is where the future bends, because memory softens with distance. The warmth remains, but the edges blur. Young salamanders speak of compassion naturally, without knowing how rare it is. They do not yet feel its cost. They have not yet watched civilians slow an extraction, or mercy invite ambush, or restraint allow another chapter to claim victory they earned. They believe virtue is default. This innocence is both a gift and danger. Remembers. The elders see this. Veterans whose armor carries more repair seams than original plate, whose voices rasp not from age, but from decades of smoke. They do not scold the young, they prepare them. Preparation does not look like sermons. It looks like silence. Metal teaches patience, where mistakes glow visibly, where correction must be gentle, or the blade shatters. The forge is pedagogy. You cannot rush heat. You cannot bully steel into virtue. It must be coaxed, tempered. So too the next generation. I've heard an elder recount Vulkan pulling a child from rubble and stop mid-sentence, leaving the listener suspended. The lesson is not stated. It must be discovered. This is intentional, because the galaxy will not explain itself either. The young must learn to Vulkan's world. The chaplains worry quietly. Faith thrives on clarity, but clarity erodes in complexity. How do you preach restraint to warriors bred for destruction when the enemy does not hesitate? How do you justify a sacrifice that saves strangers but costs brothers? The answers cannot be universal, so they teach values, not rules. This is dangerous education, because values require interpretation, and interpretation varies. Already, differences emerge. Some young salamanders interpret Vulkan's creed as protection of humanity's spirit. Even if some bodies are lost, these are not opposing views, but they create tension. The future fractures subtly, not through rebellion, but through emphasis. This is how legacies evolve, not through betrayal, but through sincere disagreement. Fire remembers. I have seen councils where these debates linger for hours, voices low, measured, no shouting, no threats, just the slow recognition that Vulkan's shadow does not point in only one direction. This realization frightens some. They fear dilution, that Vulkan's ideals will become anything Others fear rigidity, that holding too tightly will break them when reality refuses to conform. Both fears are valid. Either is resolved. This unresolved state defines the future. The salamanders will not splinter violently. They will strain. Longer. Objectives expand. Humanitarian considerations delay victory. Other chapters grow impatient. Allies question efficiency. High Lords note discrepancies. The salamanders do not respond defensively. They do not argue their worth. They simply continue. This quiet persistence on Imperium more than defiance ever could, because it cannot be categorized. It is not heresy, not insubordination, not inefficiency by ignorance. It is a choice, repeated, documented, justified by values older than the current Imperium itself. The next generation learns this pressure firsthand. Learn that compassion draws scrutiny, that mercy must be defended rhetorically as well as tactically. This adds another layer of fatigue. To fight enemies is one burden. To justify kindness to allies is another. Some will falter here, not because they abandon explanation. These will become quieter, more insular. They will protect civilians fiercely, but speak little of it. Others will become ambassadors. They will articulate the Salamander's ethos patiently. Again and again, they will bleed politically. Both roles are net remembers. The young learn too that Vulkan's humanity is not reciprocated. There will be worlds that reject their aid, civilians that fear them despite rescue, governors that exploit their mercy. This wounds deeply because it undermines the story they were. Elders do not lie to them here. They say quietly, "We do this anyway. This is the most difficult lesson, goodness without reward." Vulkan knew this. Perhaps this is why he left, because presence can comfort, absence forces conviction. The next generation does not wait for Vulkan's return. Not true, they hope, but they do not plan around it. They plan around each other. Brotherhood becomes heavier than lineage. They begin to say, "We are Vulkan now," not as arrogance, but as acceptance, that his ideals survive only through embodiment. The flame passes, not cleanly. Have watched a young salamander kneel beside a dying human child. Remove his gauntlet, place a massive hand gently around something so fragile. No witnesses, no record, just a choice. That moment mattered more than any victory, because it proved continuity. Of the salamanders will not be pure Vulkan. It will be Vulkan filtered through centuries of loss. This will change them. It must. But the core remains, fire that warms before it destroys. As long as that survives, the lineage endures. Sleep with me, but from memory grown heavy, because endurance is not only tested by victory, it is tested by failure. The salamanders speak of triumph rarely, but they remember their failures with precision, not as punishment, as instruction. I was there for some of them, standing in shadow, cold against my chest, watching heroes choose and still lose. Some defeats come from overwhelming force, from betrayal, from fate too vast to deflect. These hurt, but But they are not the wounds that linger. The wounds that linger come from remembers. There was a world whose name is now spoken only in low tones. A mining colony wrapped in storms of ash, its population dense, its defenses thin. The Salamanders arrived early, too early. They believed time was mercy. They believed evacuate behave as logic suggested. They believed civilians were gathered, sheltered, protected by walls of ceramite and faith. The Salamanders held the perimeter, refusing pursuit, refusing escalation. They waited. The enemy did not. What followed is not because it was quiet. A misjudged vector, a delayed extraction, a secondary incursion, unnoticed, until it was already inside. By the time correction came, the shelter was breached, not annihilated. Worse, partially survivors, and dead together. Better. The survivors lived. That was the metric. But the dead, they had been promised safety. This is the failure that endures. Not loss, broken promise. The Salamanders did not withdraw immediately. They secured the remaining civilians, completed it early. Then they stayed, long after the Imperium deemed the world resolved. They helped bury the dead, not symbolically, literally armor removed, hands blackened with ash and soil. They listened to the grief of survivors. They did not defend their choices. They did not explain, accepted anger, silently. This is not required of them. No edict demands this. This is where failure changes shape. It becomes shared. Fire remembers. The chapter council debated afterwards. Quietly, they asked, did restraint cause this? Would aggression have prevented breach? Have altered outcome? There were no clear answers. Only probabilities. Probabilities offer no comfort. Some argued doctrine must adapt. That protection sometimes requires preemptive force. Others argued that this was a miscalculation, not philosophy. Philosophy risks identity, yet refusing adaptation risks repetition. This tension has no resolution. It becomes part of the Salamander's inner landscape. The young hear fragments of this story, never the full weight. Not until they are ready, because to inherit Vulkan's creed is also to inherit its cost. Not everyone bears it well. Some brothers carry these failures inward. They grow quieter, more deliberate. Their armor bears marks of repair. Their gaze lingers on civilians longer than necessary. They double check evacuations, triple check. They sleep become more decisive, not cruel, but firm. They limit exposure, accelerate timelines, still within doctrine, but closer to its edge. This divergence is not condemned. It is observed. The Salamanders do not purge response. Where a salamander chooses speed, and a single life is lost as a result. These never reach record. Only conscience. The chapter does not absolve these silently, nor does it punish them publicly. The brother will speak, eventually, to a chaplain, to a forge father, about guilt. It is about recalibration. Am I still aligned? This question echoes endlessly. The Imperium views failure as weakness. The Salamanders view it as data. Painful data, but essential without acknowledging failure. Compassion becomes myth. Unchallenged success. He promised effort. This is misunderstood, even by his sons. They want assurance. They want their sacrifices to guarantee the outcome. The galaxy does not operate this way. Acceptance of this truth is slow. Some never reach it. Those who cannot reconcile this struggle not with loyalty, but with peace. They serve, they fight, they protect, but the weight never lightens. These are the ones who stand longest at the pyres, not seeking forgiveness, but meaning. Fire remembers its pace, not as offering as a question. Was this enough? No answer came. That silence is not cruelty, it is continuity, because Vulkan's legacy was never reassurance. It was a responsibility to choose again, even after failure, especially after failure. Never fall. They endure, because they rise without rewriting their values to excuse the fall. This is rare. This is exhausting. This is why their compassion feels heavy, not radiant, but earned as you rest. Let this truth settle gently. Virtue coherence sustains. Rest a little deeper now. The ash falls slower. The night stretches wide and patient, because there comes a time in every long war when hope does not vanish. It thins. The Salamanders know this season well. They call it the long carry. Losses are cumulative, and belief must be transported manually. One step, one breath, one decision at a time. Fire remembers. The galaxy grows colder in these eras, not physically, spiritually. Worlds burn, not because they must, but because it is efficient. Lives are written off, not because they are lost, but because saving them would delay something else. The Salamanders feel this shift immediately, because their way of war begins to feel out of phase. They arrive at systems where evacuation protocols are theoretical, where planetary governors have already accepted collateral as inevitable, where allies ask, "Why are you slowing us down?" This question is never asked loudly. It is implied in the tightening of timelines, in the absence of civilian corridors, in the unspoken assumption that some lives are already spent. The Salamanders do not argue, they adjust. Adjustment does not mean abandonment. It means carrying the flame more carefully. When hope thins, it becomes fragile. And fragile things require protection. Fire remembers. In these times, the Salamanders begin to fight differently. Not more gently, but more deliberately. They establish sanctuaries instead of strongholds, extraction points instead of kill zones. They allocate warriors to guard evacuees who may never know their names. This is not tactically optimal. Everyone knows this, including them. But the calculus has changed. Because when hope is scarce, symbolism gains weight. If the galaxy believes none can be saved, so the Salamanders become evidence. Quiet, unbroadcast, but undeniable. The civilians they protect carry stories outward of giants who did not leave, who stood between them and annihilation, who waited until the last. They soften despair. Incrementally, fire remembers. The cost of this role is isolation. Other chapters grow distant, not hostile, just unconvinced. They respect the Salamanders, but they do not emulate them because emulation would require sacrifice. This loneliness, they have always walked slightly apart. What changes now is scale. As wars multiply, as fronts stretch, the long carry becomes endless. This tests even the most resolute. There are moments, rare exists. Are we protecting a humanity that has already let go of itself? This doubt does not lead to surrender. It leads to grief. Grief must be managed. If it hardens into bitterness, the flame becomes destructive. So the Salamanders ritualize sorrow. They light braziers at dusk. Victory, but endurance. They recite names, not of heroes, but of civilians saved and civilians lost. Both are remembered. Because selective memory breeds distortion. Fire remembers. In the long care, what he would do, and begin asking, would he understand why I am tired? This shift is subtle, but profound, because it allows them to rest. Not physically, spiritually. Even Vulkan knew limits. Even Vulkan vanished. The Salamanders do not frame his acknowledgement that no one, not even a Primarch, can hold the line forever. This reframing saves them because it grants permission to rely on one another. Brotherhood deepens in the long carry, not through camaraderie, but through shared fatigue. On a pauldron, a nod before deployment, a silent exchange during evacuation. No words needed. Fire remembers. The Imperium will never fully understand this phase. It records battles, counts worlds, calculates loss. It does not measure moral stamina. The Salam time, not because they are absent, but because their work does not produce spectacle. They hold, they prevent, they delay collapse. History rarely notices prevention, but survival depends on it. There will be accusations of inefficiency, of scent. Absorb these quietly. They have learned that defensive values does not always look convincing, especially to those who have already surrendered theirs. Fire remembers, and yet, in the coldest stretches of the long carry, something unexpected occurs. Other forces begin to evacuation corridors. They delay orbital strikes. They consider civilian density. Not because they believe, but because the Salamanders proved it was possible. Even inefficiently, possibility alters expectation. Expectation alters behavior. Command. But through persistence, the Salamanders may never be numerous, but they are catalytic. A single flame can change how darkness behaves. As hope thins, the Salamanders do not burn brighter. They burn steadier. Consistency becomes their rebellion. An idea that cruelty is inevitable. This is not optimism. It is a refusal. Refusal to let the long night define the final shape of humanity. Rest now. The rain softens against metal. Stay close. The night stretches wide, but there is warmth here. Because even in the galaxy's ceaseless struggle, there are pauses, quiet interludes, moments between wars, For the Salamanders, these moments are sacred, not because they are safe across decades, centuries, watching as armor returns to forges, weapons are cleaned, and the living dust settles. These pauses are never luxurious. They are functional, yet they feel sacred to those who endure constantly. The Salamanders walk slowly through their home golden, its ash settling gently like the end of some vast, forgotten symphony. They breathe differently here. Shoulders drop, voices lower. Even the air seems warmer. Fire remembers. It is here, among these pauses, that they reflect. The volcanic vents, hands immersed in the heat, feeling the planet itself pulse beneath them. Others walk among children, teaching quietly the discipline of hammering metal or the patience of forging flames. Lessons not for war, but for life. These moments of teaching are delicate. The young are impressionable, eager to embody heroism. But they have not yet felt the weight of decision. They watch elders lift debris with ease, place shields between themselves and danger, and carry civilians from harm, and they ask silently, "Will I be able?" Fire remembers. The elders, they do not want to create expectation. Instead, they demonstrate patience, compassion, calculation, endurance. Every action a whisper of legacy. Sometimes the Salamanders sit in quiet groups, without discussion, simply allowing presence to reinforce belonging. Rustle of cloth, distant rain against ceramite. Moments like these anchor the soul. The Imperium has little concept of this interlude. They expect Astartes to be relentless, constantly in the fray. To pause is often interpreted as weakness. But the Salamanders know. Pause is consolidation. It is reflection. Without pause, even the strongest flame flickers out. During these intervals, the survivors of previous campaigns also return. They bring stories, smiles, sometimes grief. Civilians kneel quietly, placing flat salamanders themselves, but for the protection they represent. The Astartes accept these gestures with humility, removing helmets, nodding gently, never claiming credit, because recognition was never the purpose. Fire remembers. In these pauses, the Salamanders reconcile with apology, but as understanding, they speak quietly among themselves. Moments of loss are dissected carefully, analyzing where restraint met miscalculation, where compassion delayed response. No blame is assigned, only insight. This allows growth, and it allows rest. Even brief sleep differently here, lightly, yet deeply. Senses attuned, but burden slightly eased, because they know the long night will return. But for now, it does not dominate. The young notice this rhythm. They learn that war is relentless, but so is recovery. Limit. That humanity is preserved, not only in victories, but in these pauses, and they begin to understand what it means to inherit Vulkan's legacy. It is not glory, not command, not survival of the fittest. It is balance, a balance between action, between fire that destroys and fire that warms. Even as the galaxy forgets, even as bureaucrats tally casualties, even as wars rage elsewhere. The Salamanders continue quietly, anchored to their homeworld, anchored to each other, anchored to principles that have millennia. Fire remembers. These interludes also remind them of mortality, not their own. They endure far beyond natural spans, but the people they protect, the ones who smile softly, place gifts at shrines, kneel in silence, they do not live forever. This knowledge and urgency. The pause is a mirror, showing them what must be cherished and what cannot be postponed. It is also where subtle sorrow enters. The Salamanders carry grief, not as weight, but as companion, a quiet presence alongside joy. They do not dwell. They do not lament loudly. They remember. Remembrance shapes their next deployment. Fire remembers. Even in interludes, discipline is constant. Forging, training, maintenance, all occur without fail. They cannot allow rust to claim armor, or complacency to claim skill. Rise seamlessly. But these pauses make them more than soldiers. They make them anchors for the galaxy, for their chapter, for the people who still believe protection is possible, even if that protection is fragile. I have seen young salamanders kneel at the edge of lava flows, watching the molten light ripple across their features, feeling both awe and humility. It is here they understand. Vulkan is not a figure to be emulated blindly. He is a context, a standard, an ideal. They inherit the essence, but must temper it themselves. Endurance. Fire remembers. So now, let yourself drift with them, through ash, through molten light, through the quiet moments that define survival more than battle ever could. You are safe here, among the green and the flame, your breath matching theirs. Lean closer is steady. The embers warm, because now the pause ends, and the salamanders return. They move through ash and shadow, back to war, not with fanfare, not with trumpets or banners, but with quiet deliberation. The lessons of interlude guide every rages, as the Imperium demands. As enemies multiply, they carry the fire, not simply as weapon, but as promise. Promise that civilization may endure, that the weak may be protected, that mercy may survive. Fire remembers. The battlefield greets them, refugees, scattered corpses, civilians caught between orbiting fleets and marauding forces. Every decision weighs, every movement counts, yet uncertainty is constant. The young feel it first. They arrive expecting heroism, glory, decisive action. Instead, they meet hesitation. The veterans slow them, not to delay, but to orient, to ensure protection before victory. The young resist this quietly. They have been trained for this rhythm, but the instinct to strike is strong. The elders allow it, not because restraint is flexible, effective. Fire remembers. The first engagement occurs unexpectedly. A small settlement surrounded, under fire from raiders who care little for the defenseless. The salamanders arrive, their armor gleaming faintly in the ashen haze, molten light reflecting off ceremony. They do not fire first. They assess. They guide civilians to safe corridors. They remove debris. They organize shelters. The enemy grows impatient. Forces press. Some young are frustrated. The decision to wait, to ensure evacuation, feels carried this lesson through decades, through absence, through interludes, through grief. They know patience saves more lives than fury. The first casualty is a child, a moment that is devastating because it is preventable. Then, quietly, do not dwell. Do not let grief dictate speed. Move forward, even as sorrow lingers. Fire remembers. They fight not to exterminate, but to protect. Every blast, every strike, every tactical withdrawal is Vulkan. The young begin to understand that heroism is not measured in kills, or accolades, or territory. It is measured in survival and in care. As the battle stretches, the enemy grows reckless. They attempt to cut off escape routes, to force confrontation, to respond, but not as others might. They do not fight for pride. They fight for continuance. They sacrifice opportunity for victory to preserve the defenseless. The young witness this and struggle to accept it because it is slower, because it appears less decisive, because it costs them personally. Yet it works. More lives are saved than would have been otherwise. Fire remembers. After the fighting ends, the battlefield is not a triumphal scene. It is littered, scarred, a reminder of imperfection. The Salamanders walk among it, checking for survivors, repairing shelters, bereaved. The young begin to see what Interlude had taught. That battle is only one part of war. The aftermath is the test of endurance. The next encounter comes differently. A fortified city, civilian population used as shield, enemy entrenched. The Imperium would demand aggression, swift, decisive. The Salamanders hesitate, not for fear, but for calculation. They create safe corridors, redirect artillery, establish defenses that minimize civilian risk. The young want faster solutions. They do not yet see the subtle victories until civilians understand that restraint can be stronger than power. Fire remembers. Even as the battles continue, even as losses occur, even as grief accompanies them, the Salamanders endure. They endure because the pause gave them strength, because reflection. Each victory is tempered, each success acknowledged with humility. Even when the Imperium praises them, they do not celebrate loudly. Their pride is quiet, their joy subdued, because they know the cost, because endurance is not glory, it is survival of values. Watched a young veteran kneel beside a civilian, cradling a wounded child, armor scorched, hands trembling. And in that moment, I saw the fire remembered. The lessons of Interlude, the shadows of failure, the ghost of Vulkan, all converge. This is the essence. Battles themselves, not the victories, but the deliberate choice to endure, to protect, to carry fire forward, even when hope seems scarce, even when the long night presses close. Fire remembers, and the young learn that to survive is not enough. one must endure. Salamanders do, quietly, patiently, without spectacle. The galaxy may ignore them, may scorn them, may misunderstand them, but their flame persists. Even now, rest now. Let the embers calm, the ash settles. Very well. The galaxy exhales with us, because every story has an ending, even one that spans 10,000 years, even one whispered by a remembrancer. The salamanders endure, as they always have, not because the galaxy is kind, but because they are resolute. Fire remembers. I have watched them return. Nocturne, their armor scarred, their bodies exhausted, their spirits heavy with grief, and yet they stand. Vulkan's presence, though absent, lingers, not as a shadow, but as a quiet standard, understanding of the costs already paid. The planet welcomes them, the air warm with ash and sulfur. The lava flows painting light across blackened rock. The distant sky golden with fading embers. And for a moment, the galaxy feels softer, less immediate. Hands, they return to their forges, their workshops, their councils, not as a celebration, but as ritual, to honor what survived and what was lost. Even the young watch and understand that heroism is quieter than legend, that endurance is heavier than armor. Strength fire remembers. The long night has not ended, and it will not. There will be more battles, more loss, more grief. But in this moment, the salamanders breathe. They sit together in silence, a handful of brothers, the young and the old. Weapons, pauldrons touching in silent solidarity. Their presence alone is sufficient, because presence conveys care, and endurance conveys hope. Even if the galaxy forgets, even if the Imperium never praises, even if the children they saved glow steadily, not bright, not spectacular, but warm, consistent, reassuring. And in this quiet, sorrowful moment, they reflect on everything, on Vulkan, on absences, on failures, on victories, because they understand the truth that endurance itself is a gift, that protection, even unseen, matters, that humanity is preserved, not in grand gestures, but in repeated small acts of care. Fire remembers. I too remember, and whisper. There is sorrow, but it is tempered with warmth. There is grief, but it is steady and manageable. There is history, but it is carried lightly as a mantle of purpose, not burden. The salamanders close their eyes, not in ignorance of what waits, but in trust of what they have built. A flame that protects, a brotherhood that endures, a legacy that persists. Even absence is accounted for. Even failure informs future care. Even suffering strengthens. This is Vulkan's gift, and the gift of all who endure alongside him. Fire remembers. And now, with breath, match the rhythm of the embers. Let the ash settle in your thoughts. Every sigh you release, every gentle exhale, carries sorrow and warmth and understanding. The galaxy sleeps, even the distant stars, even the dying worlds, even the unrecorded. Stand vigil while the fires burn quietly, while memory and endurance weave their slow, patient song. Carry this quiet sorrow, this soft warmth into your rest, for tomorrow the galaxy will demand again, and tomorrow the long. Keep watch until you wake, and so the tale fades into the long night. The embers cool, the rain grows softer. Carry this sorrow gently into sleep. Tomorrow is another war, but tonight there is only quiet. Good night.